Some breaking news just coming into us now. Russia's Justice Ministry has added this broadcaster, Deutsche Welle, to a list of media organizations it labels as foreign agents. That designation means we are required to label anything we publish with a disclaimer. The term carries negative Soviet-era connotations in Russia, suggestive of spying. It's not the first action taken against DW. In early February, Russia ordered the closure of our Moscow bureau, and our website was blocked by Russia's state communications regulator earlier this month. For more, I'm joined now by Emily Sherwin. Emily was part of DW's Moscow bureau until Russian authorities withdrew accreditation and revoked DW's broadcasting license shortly before the start of the Ukraine invasion. Emily, first I want to ask you, what is your reaction to this news?
Well, on the one hand, you know, this announcement comes as a shock, but in some ways it's not unexpected. You mentioned that DW's office in Moscow was actually closed down by the Russian authorities in early February. They withdrew our accreditations, including my journalistic accreditation. And at the time, they already said that they would consider also labeling Deutsche Welle a foreign agent. They've also been talking, you know, various people within the Russian government have been talking about that for several years now. What it means, as you said, is that there are more administrative things that Deutsche Welle has to do within Russia, and also that all publications need to be labeled with this disclaimer that we are spreading, you know, that we are a foreign agent. This information is being spread by a foreign agent. The authorities have always claimed that it doesn't mean that you can't report if you have that label, but of course it carries these connotations of spying. And now, you know, during wartime, I think these connotations carry much, much more weight, especially, you know, with late February, rather, the state prosecutor's office said that aiding a foreign government in any way could be considered treason, which could carry up to 20 years in prison. So what that means, you know, aiding a foreign government, does that now mean if you repost Deutsche Welle's publications, is that aiding a foreign government? We don't know.
At the very least, it certainly makes our jobs harder. Tell us more about this foreign agent law in Russia and how it's used by authorities.
Well, in recent weeks, since the war started, it hasn't, you know, come up too much. But last year, especially early on in 2021, almost all critical media outlets were either labeled extremist or rather undesirable, or foreign agents. Now, for the last few weeks since the war began, instead of that, the measures have been actually more extreme. So many media organizations were simply closed down. For example, the radio station Echo Moskvy, the TV station Dozhd. You mentioned also BBC and DW, Meduza were blocked within the country. So several media outlets that report in Russian for Russians, you know, from abroad. The authorities blocked Facebook and Instagram, declared the parent company of Facebook and Instagram, Meta, extremist. So it's essentially a case where the Russian authorities are not letting any critical voices into the media landscape in Russia anymore. And this newest news is kind of an example of that again.
Well, at least it's good to see you under the same roof. DW's Emily Sherwin, many thanks. For some more insight, let's bring in Lawrence Sheets. He's the former Moscow bureau chief of U.S. broadcaster NPR. He joins us from Odessa, Ukraine. It's nice to see you, Lawrence. President Zelensky is signaling he's open to some kind of compromise. But is that message even getting through to Russians?
I'm not certain that it's getting through to Russians because, as you alluded to, even Mr. Zelensky's interview, which was intended for a Russian audience in Russian and to Russian journalists, was forbidden to be broadcast in Russia under unclear circumstances. There's no statute for this. They were just simply ordered, do not broadcast his interview. I don't think that it really would come as a surprise because support for NATO membership, if you go back to, say, 2005, was less than 20% in Ukraine. It's slightly above 50% according to the latest polls and is growing, but it's not beyond the pale that it would be something which, number one, you would want to put to a referendum to make sure that you have public support for it in Ukraine. How you do that, I don't know, during a war which has consumed the eastern half of the country for the most part, and areas like Kharkiv, which your correspondent mentioned. So I'm not too surprised that he is floating the idea of a referendum.
I'm curious, given your history covering the area, what other crucial issues, particularly related to this war, do you believe the Russian people may very well be in the dark about?
I think they're in the dark about just about everything. Everyone in this city, in Odessa, which, by the way, is an overwhelmingly Russian-speaking city, it has a deep heritage and deep tie to to the Jewish community in Eastern and Central Europe. I mean, Odessa was a plurality, majority Jewish city until 1941. But everyone has a story. I sat at a table yesterday with Ukrainian friends, all of whom are Russian speakers, by the way, but they are Ukrainian. And they all have a story about contacting relatives or relatives contacting them by telephone in Russia and saying, look, we're coming to liberate you. And they say to their friends, and these are people they've known for years, we don't need your liberation. You don't understand what's going on. So that I'm sure that most Russians don't know what's going on. They have access to state television only. If they want, of course, and this has always been the case. It was the case in the Soviet Union. They have access to shortwave radio. They can use VPNs. They can use other means of obtaining information. But even the VPN issue, if you use the internet, rumors are being floated inside Russia that if you use a VPN, the security police will find you. This was what I was told yesterday by my Ukrainian friends who speak Russian, are Russian speakers. They're being told this by their relatives in Russia and friends.
You know, I'm curious. President Zelensky has warned that Russia's actions in Ukraine threaten to instill a deep hatred toward Russia, which is what President Putin claims he's fighting against. Is there any discussion, as far as you can see from your vantage point, in Russia about how this conflict is hurting attitudes towards the country?
Well, I'm sure that there is. There was always an expression in Russia in Soviet times which was called za kuhonim stolom. It meant behind the kitchen table, at the kitchen table. Things like this were discussed. Of course, there are discussions going on between people. But this is limited probably to that percent of the population who is really interested in getting information and motivated to get information and not afraid of losing their jobs or punitive measures. Perhaps the broader swath of the population simply isn't interested and are intent on believing what they're told by state television in Russia.
That's analyst Lawrence Sheets reporting from Odessa, Ukraine. Many thanks, sir.
Thank you.